So welcome to the meeting, everybody. This is the Environmental Quality Board, or EQB. My name is Dan Katzenberger, and I'm the public member from Congressional District Number 3 and the Vice Chair of EQB. I'll be chairing the first part of this meeting, and then Chair Daubenberger will join us at 2 p.m. and chair the rest of the meeting. I'll turn it over now to Executive Director Catherine Nuschler with roll call.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Arnold.
Present.
Board Member Bakken.
Present.
Board Member Bauerkemper.
Present, thanks.
Right. Board Member Brands. Him. I don't think we were expecting Commissioner Cunningham, but I think I see Assistant Commissioner Kunis.
Yep, here, thank you.
All right. Chair Daubenberger will join us in a little bit. Commissioner Gronball.
Present.
Board Member Hintz. Don't believe we were expecting her. Chair Holman.
Present.
Vice Chair Katzenberger.
Here.
Right. Commissioner Kessler.
I am here as well.
Board Member Martin. Member Martin? I don't believe we're expecting Commissioner Verelak. Do we have anyone on from DW, Commissioner McKinnon?
It's Kevin. I am here.
Okay. Board Member Nelson.
Present.
Don't believe that we are expecting Commissioner Peterson. I'm just double checking. Commissioner Peterson. Have anyone on from MDA? Board Member Smith. Oh, I see Stephen Roos. Thank you, Steve. From MDA. Board Member Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Stroman.
I'm here. Thank you.
And Councilmember Lindstrom.
Hello, hello.
Excellent. Did I miss anybody? Member Brands. Board Member Hintz. Board Member Martin. Okay. All right. We have 10 members today. A quorum is 9. So I think we are set, Mr. Chair.
Awesome. So thank you for that. So next
Sorry,
on the
Catherine.
agenda.
Oh, and
This
there's
is-
Board Member Martin.
Sorry about that. I didn't get unmuted quite in time.
Well, we have 11.
And so great. So the next item on the agenda is approval of the consent, if I can speak, agenda. So the meeting minutes from the February 18th, 2026 EQB meeting are on packet starting on page 5. And the preliminary agenda for today's meeting, April 15th, 2026, is packet page 3. So with that, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I can make that motion.
Okay, Commissioner Kessler's made the motion. Is there a second? And Holman has seconded that. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve the consent agenda? Hearing none, we can move to a vote. Executive Director Nuschler, please call the roll.
All right. On the consent agenda, Commissioner Arnold.
Yes.
Board Member Bakken.
Yes.
Board Member Bauerkemper.
Yes.
Board Member Brands is not present. Commissioner Cunningham is not present. Chair Daubenberger is not present. Commissioner Gronball.
Yes.
Board Member Hintz. Not present. Chair Holman.
Aye.
Vice Chair Katzenberger.
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler.
Yes.
Board Member Martin.
Yes.
Commissioner Verelak is not present. Board Member Nelson.
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson is not present. Board Member Smith.
Yes.
Commissioner Stroman.
Aye.
Great. So with that, unanimous ayes, the motion carries and the minutes and the agenda are adopted. I'll now turn it over to Executive Director Catherine Nuschler, the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope your taxes are done since it is tax day. A few logistics before we start. We are recording the meeting, as you likely know. If you are joining us online, the meeting chat is open and visible, but we do not save that as part of the meeting records. So please use it only for logistical issues, like if you can't hear us, or if you do want to comment at a point when we get to the appropriate point in the agenda and you can't find the raise hand button, you can also just identify in the chat that you want to comment. So board members, the presenters will welcome your feedback and your questions today. You know how to use the raise hand function or jump in during discussions. Board members should be able to mute and unmute themselves. So members of the public, your opportunity to comment today will be during our gas production rulemaking item. That's where we put our main public comment period because we figured that's where most of the interest was today. So when we get to that point in the agenda, please use the raise hand button if you're online, and we will add your name to the list of commenters. If you're in person, we should have your name on a sign-up sheet. The sign-in sheet is out front, and we will queue you for comments when we get to that point and let people know when they can unmute and speak. And I think we'll just go through this again when we get there. So just moving on to reports and announcements. I'm very pleased to announce that we have a new staff person joining the ER team as of last week. So Sophia Musak is with us. Well, she's at the greeting table is where she is. She joins us from DNR, where she has been working as, I think it's assistant regional ecologist, and has gained some solid environmental review experience. So we're very happy to have her join our team. And we are now fully staffed, which is exciting. I wanted to also give you all an update on the EIS scoping rule that you approved in February. Those materials were submitted to the Court of Administrative Hearings for the 5-day public comment period and the court's review in February. If you recall, that's the legislature directed us to make specific changes to the scoping rules. We did that. The ALJ reviewed, and she did approve parts of the rule and disapprove parts of the rule. We therefore need to make changes to the parts that she disapproved and resubmit them. She made comments sort of concerning her disapproval that we can follow as a guideline in updating the rules. So we are working through that, and we will resubmit a revised rule to the Court of Administrative Hearings for review. The report from the judge is on our EQB rules and regulations website if anyone wants to look at it, or if you want a copy and can't find it, let me know and I will send it around to you. Let's see, what else do I have? I did want to also flag the continuous improvement public engagement process on our website is open through May 1st. Again, we are gathering input and looking to do that in sort of a more structured way than we did last time, partially because now we have the criteria that the board developed for an effective program. And then the results of that will come to the ARIS meeting, and that is part of why we are planning to have the ARIS meeting in July this year. It gives us a little more time to parse through that information. So more to come on that. I will also note that on the last page of your packet, there's a copy of the letter from the Minnesota Association of Family Physicians about health impact assessments and environmental review. I think the copy that's in your packet was the one that was sent directly to Board Member Smith. And I know some others of you may have received a copy directly. I know some of the commissioners have. So I just note health and environmental review has been a longstanding topic of interest for the board. In 2018, the Environmental Review Advisory Panel provided recommendations for the board to act on both climate change and health. And the board moved forward with climate change first. I think at this point, with climate being pretty well integrated into our program, we are ready to move forward with this idea of integrating health concepts into environmental review, which has been on our work plan for this year. So because of the time since that report, the changes in board members, the staff have been planning a presentation for next month for May to kind of ground us all in the work that's been done on the issue to date and to begin a discussion on how we want to proceed. So I will be communicating that back to the Association of Family Physicians, and I'm sure we will also be talking to them about a time for them to come and share their perspective with the board. Last thing, we're approaching the last committee deadline for the 2026 Minnesota legislative session, which is Friday. We're just continuing to watch some bills and amendments coming up related to environmental review. There have been some discussions around feedlots, data centers, drainage, and similar items, and we're just keeping an eye on that. I have no crystal ball about what will pass or what will not. So that is my report for today.
Great. Thank you, Director Nuschler. So are there any questions or comments from any board members? Have a hand up? Board Member Bauerkemper.
All right, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Catherine, for the report. Just curious if you happen to have any updates on the appointment of public members and how that process is going.
Board Member Bauerkemper, I do not have any updates on that. It was on my to-do list to look at that tomorrow and see if I can get some. And I'll keep you posted.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Member Bauerkemper. Any other comments or questions on the Executive Director's report? I'm not seeing any. So the next item on the agenda is Spring Pollinator Report Update. And this is done by Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. Come in. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members of the board, members of the public, people here, people virtually. My name is Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno, and I am the State Pollinator Coordinator with the Minnesota Environmental Quality Board, and I am here representing the Interagency Pollinator Protection Team to present to you the draft outline and what we're planning for this year's pollinator report, and also present to you some of our plans for outreach events and engagement with the public. If my technology works. Okay, let me see if this works. There you go. Yay, okay, perfect. I'm just gonna over here. Okay, so today I'm gonna provide a brief background on the work that we have been doing and why we care about this pollinator issue. Then I will present the draft outline of the 2026 pollinator report. And then I will present some of the outreach activities that we are planning, some that we have already done. So I'm writing about that a little bit. Then some of our next steps. And finally, the board will have some time for discussion and questions. So today the board will hear this presentation and we'll have time to provide feedback to the materials presented. Okay, so first of all, and I sometimes feel like I never get tired of reminding us why we care about pollinators, why this work is important. Pollinators are essential for the reproduction of the majority of the flowering plants in the world, which means they are crucial for the sustainability of our food systems, for our natural resources, our ecosystems, the balance that we care about in this world, and also for our way of life, our economy, our way of life. Unfortunately, pollinators are in trouble. They are threatened by pesticides, by climate change, by the loss and fragmentation of their habitat, by diseases and parasites. And unfortunately, these factors do not act in isolation. They interact with each other and can amplify each other's detrimental effect on pollinators. So a good example that I like to give with this is, for example, because of climate change, sometimes pollinators miss out on early flowering plants in the spring when they start emerging. So this is bad for the pollinators that miss out on food, but also for the plants that miss out on the insects that help them reproduce. If we compound to that the effects of diseases and parasites, pollinators get weaker immune systems, and then if they get exposed to pesticides, then that's just a cocktail for disaster. So we know that this is a big issue, and there's been several years that this has been going on, and we care about that. So in our state, and now I'm going to show you a brief timeline, because the interagency work that we started doing to protect pollinators started in 2016 with the first executive order. Then it continued with the 2019 order when administrations changed. But if you notice, 2016, 2026, this year is the 10-year anniversary of our interagency efforts. And I just broke down the timeline. This is the first part, just to highlight that since the beginning of this work, agencies started allocating resources and staff expertise to think about what are the things that we can do together to help pollinators, in addition to the ones that we're doing individually, to the actions that we're taking individually. This executive order, both executive orders directed the EQB to convene the Interagency Pollinator Protection Team that I'm gonna just call Interagency Team or IPPT from now on. And also established some paths for us to engage with the public. So in the beginning, in 2018, it was with the Governor's Committee for Pollinator Protection, which this big group of stakeholders from different sectors of Minnesota, industry, advocacy, farmers, different places, they developed a set of recommendations to the governor, to the IPPT. And these recommendations helped us inform what our goals for pollinator protection were going to be and what is our desired outcome, our North Star, which I will remind us what those are in a minute. In addition to that, the team developed a civic engagement process afterwards to help us meaningfully engage with the public and receive feedback and receive what Minnesotans are thinking, what are we learning, where are the places where we need to allocate resources, what we need to do. Each year, we've come to the board to present on our progress with a full annual pollinator report that in latest years has included highlights from each agency and the actions that we're taking, but also challenges that we're facing and recommendations that we have for our leadership. So if this will let me go to the next slide, there you go. Think, okay, perfect. So in 2022, the interagency team determined that it was necessary for us to develop an action framework that will really help all our agencies come together with a unified vision of what are some of the actions that we can do and identify, you know, what are the different levers, players, partnerships that we have been developing throughout these years to help us allocate resources in a way that will continue to move the needle in the right direction. But not only that, but also identify where the needle is and what are actions that we're already doing so that we don't duplicate our efforts, that we can leverage each other's capacity, but also this framework really helps us keep each other accountable. So I think that's one other aspect of this action framework that we're using since 2023 to bring to you our progress with the annual reports. I forgot to mention, which is also really, really important, that in 2019, we developed the scorecards with metrics and indicators that we are planning to bring to you every 3 years. So our next scorecard set is going to come next year. So both together, the action framework and the scorecards, we think are great tools for us to inform to our leadership, but also to the public, the different actions that we're taking, but also how are we doing in terms of like how are pollinators doing now. So just that brief. So, so then this year, 10-year anniversary. So we think that this year brings a great opportunity for us to inform about all these different background actions and progress, but also the challenges that we're still facing and the work that still need to happen. So as I promised, here are our pollinator protection goals. We have 3. First one, that land support pollinators. We identify the key outcome of more food resources, nesting, and overwintering sites for pollinators. Goal 2 is the judicious use of pesticides to reduce impacts to pollinators from pesticides through the integrated pest management. And then goal 3, that Minnesotans care about and understand pollinators. And our work toward these 3 goals, and our agencies have different levels of involvement in all of these 3 goals, is to restore healthy diverse pollinator populations in our state. So just to give a shout out to all the agencies that conform this interagency team. I am personally very proud of everybody that is working in this team, that bring their expertise, that bring their enthusiasm and their passion to help pollinators. And it just has been invaluable to also count on each other to prompt us to keep working and to and to just look at the different opportunities that we have, both for communication and engagement with the public, but also for the work that we do collectively. So this year's pollinator report will be our 10-year anniversary pollinator report. We want to, in the introduction part, provide that big background of like what have we been doing during these 10 years, our charge, why are we doing this work? And also we were looking back at our previous reports during I think the first report was in 2017, which the work started in 2016, then the first report 2017. And there we had the state of pollinators piece, and there was a lot of unknowns. We still have a lot of unknowns, but we have more knowns too. So we want to bring an update on that, on like what we know now that we didn't know 10 years ago in terms of how our pollinators do in Minnesota specifically and not just worldwide. We will also include highlights of our collaboration, of our interagency collaboration, but also individual agencies collaboration, actions as well. Stories of action from our engagement with the public and what people outside and organizations outside of the state are also doing for pollinators, because we think that during this whole time, there's been this momentum growing to help pollinators, and it has become a little bit more ingrained in the consciousness of Minnesotans that this is important, that we want to all do something, that we all play a role. And then, of course, the call to action of like, what can we do together, acknowledgements, and at the end, we'll bring back the implementation of the Pollinator Action Framework matrix that we introduced last year. And just a reminder of what that looks like. Let me see, go back. Yeah, so this is a set of tables that can be a little daunting. So just a reminder of like the matrix it's divided by each goal, each pollinator protection goal. Then those tables are then subdivided between the category and subcategory. Those include the actions. So the actions that are in the Pollinator Action Framework, the projects that some agencies are working individually, some agencies are working together, some agencies are working with partners. So identifying those projects, what is the agency lead, what is their role, if it's an encourage action or it's a leadership action, then what partners we're working with, and the status of that action. So just a reminder, there's 4 categories of statuses. There's in progress, so there's something ongoing. Completed, it's an action that has been finalized. It can be an on hold action, which means that for some reason we're waiting to implement that, but we're ready for that. And then sustained effort, which means it's an action or it's a project that is just a part of the duties of that agency or that group of agencies. Okay. So that is what we're planning for the draft action framework, pollinator report. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the outreach activities that we have. So we're really excited that from January to June of this year, I don't know if you guys got to see the giant monarch movable feature at the state fair that used to be at the Eco Experience building. Now the Bell Museum is displaying this monarch. We were able to partner with the Bell Museum, with the PCA, to bring that about. And there's going to be an event in May where we're going to table there. PCA is going to table there as well. We're going to talk about the interactions between climate change and pollinators and all these exciting topics. Then in March, we had our first City to City webinar workshop on pollinators. So we partnered with Green Step Cities program of the PCA and Cersei Society and a couple cities from the state to bring a discussion and a peer-to-peer interaction to talk about what different cities can do for pollinators, what some are doing, and like just for them to share tips and to share ideas on how they can start and what different programs are there that they can get involved in. So we thought that was a really exciting workshop, and we're planning to continue doing more of those in the future. Then in April, so this Saturday, actually, there's the Great MinSec show at the U of M, and we are also tabling there. So this Saturday, we're going to be there talking about insects with a lot of people, bringing together, what are pollinators? Why are they important? All of the good stuff. Then we have the Pollinator Week this year, June 22 to 28, that we're going to be doing a coordinated social media program plans with our different IPPT, interagency team member agencies, so that we can highlight our 10-year anniversary actions and like highlighting what we've been doing. And then on September 10, still pending confirmation of that date, but we think it's going to be that date, we're going to be celebrating Pollinator Day at the State Fair with a panel at the Eco Experience Building, with it's going to be highlighting that 10-year anniversary accomplishment. So those are some of the outreach activities that we've done and some of that we are planning to do. Now I went ahead. Okay, so now for our next steps, of course, we want to continue tracking the implementation of the Pollinator Action Framework to bring to you an updated report on that, on our 2026 report. Continue our interagency collaboration, and in 2027, we're going to bring the new scorecards updated, and hopefully we'll see, you know, how are we doing with our metrics. So those are our next steps, and that will conclude my presentation. Now I feel like I went really fast, but please let me know if you have any comments, any questions that I'll be able to clarify.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. So with that, yeah, I'll open up the floor to any board members that have any questions or comment or feedback for Rebecca. Commissioner Stroman, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to say a couple of things. One is 10 years. Congratulations to the entire team. That is huge. I remember when Governor Dayton issued the first executive order, and it's amazing to think about all of the work that has been done since then and all of the coordination that has occurred. And, you know, I think just to note that this report and this interagency team is really the only place where there is a platform for collaboration across agencies. And I think what's really clear is we won't make the progress and bring the awareness that we're hoping to bring and that was envisioned in that original executive order, as well as the ones that Governor Walz brought forward and the work that, you know, we all know needs to be done. That space wouldn't exist without this team and its effort to remove the silos and improve that coordination. So I think that's really important, obviously, for the outcomes on pollinators, but also just from a government efficiency standpoint, that we are working together to remove areas of duplication and enhance efficiencies. It's also obviously, Rebecca, as you just, you know, put forward, a place where we can track the things that we're doing toward each of these goals and progress. And I think that's really important, not only for each of the agencies and members of the interagency team to see that, but obviously also really important for the public to have a single spot where they can go to see that collaboration in action. So I just wanted to note a couple of those things from DNR's perspective and say again, really appreciate the work of the entire team and Rebecca, for your leadership in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroman. Next up is Member Smith. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would just say ditto to what Commissioner Stroman said, but I think I should probably expand beyond that. So first and foremost, I had an amazing opportunity to travel to Mexico this year to see the monarch migration. So when you are in that space, it's just incredible and impactful, and having an increased appreciation for everything that you, Rebecca, and the interagency panel are doing. It's really instrumental. So I want to just ditto the kudos and the appreciation for all the work that's gone in. I know one thing that does come up regularly for the public members, those of us sitting here as representing our districts, are other and additional engagement opportunities where we can also integrate in with some of those opportunities. And I want to present that at this conversation, but also expand it beyond just today's discussion around the pollinator specific emphasis, but are there other opportunities where public members can get involved, ensure that we are part of the engagement process and just expand opportunities as we move forward throughout the year. So thank you again for all the work and kudos to the interagency team, and I appreciate all the efforts.
Thank you, Member Smith. Do any other board members have any comments, questions, or feedback for Rebecca?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Rebecca, great report. I'm just curious, you mentioned some of the activities that have happened already and some that are coming up. And I'm wondering about specific agency actions that have happened over the last year that really stand out to you as being remarkable on this topic.
Oh,
Tough
it
for
is-
you to pick out any.
it is.
all
I
listening,
don't want to
so
show any
pick up one.
favoritism.
Yeah, right.
Chair, but may I respond? Thank you. Oh, there's a lot to highlight. I'm sure I'm gonna do a disservice to some of our agencies, but I'm definitely very encouraged by the Minnesota Biological Survey that has really done a great job letting us know what diversity we have in bees in Minnesota. We didn't have that 10 years ago. We didn't know what species of bees we had, and there's still work to do to figure out, their abundance, how are they doing, things like that. But just the fact that we know that we have more than 400 species of bees that are native to Minnesota is just a crazy number to know. So I'm really encouraged by that effort and the staff that has been doing that. I went on a field trip to try to find nests of rusty badge bumblebee, and we didn't find them. We found other nests, but it was a lot of work. And the staff is just wonderful, like passionate about this subject, and so knowledgeable. I'm also very encouraged by all the work that the Board of Water and Soil Resources is doing with the Lawns to Legumes program, with the Habitat Friendly Solar, with the utilities, the other habitat utilities. I'm getting short, like I'm forgetting some of the other names, but like all these other programs that have really helped build that momentum of the general, like bringing this subject to the general public in a way that they feel that they can do something about it and that they can put, boots on the ground and like see that if they just plant even a planter, they will see butterflies and bees coming to their house. So that has been a wonderful thing to see. And I know, there has been challenges in terms of like the continued financial support for these programs, which I would always want to advocate for that. But definitely the momentum, people just saying like, I just want to know how to do it. Like I will apply for the cost share program, but if I don't get it, I still want to get the resources to just learn how to do these types of things and actions. That was awesome. And of course, the efforts that the MDA is doing in educating pesticide applicators for like bee, awareness of pollinators when they are working with pesticides. I think that's also a great program, the Bee Kill program that they have as well. We have been partnering in the past few years a lot with PCA for our outreach and the education materials. The people at PCA are also wonderful partners with us on that and helping us, because EQB, we're very small. So that, I think that's another example of the amplification of each other's capacity and the events that we've organized together with DNR, with PCA, and we're able to do more together, definitely. And seed packets, the agencies that have worked to figure out what seeds, where, what different mixes are necessary. That's another really great example. The zoo, and I stop me when you're done with me. But like honestly, the zoo and their rearing programs for endangered butterflies, the Dakota skipper, the Powashik skipperling, they have been recognized nationally for their efforts. All of them. We have the Department of Corrections, believe it or not, and our team as well. We have the Department of Education that are always striving to incorporate pollinators and curriculum and different materials available for teachers. I admin doing pollinator gardens in the Capitol building. I feel like I'm missing someone, but it's a lot.
I was just gonna say, Councilmember Lindstrom, you're gonna make her like readapt the report
Yeah.
before it's done in November. So I'm
Roll
sure
out the list.
all those accomplishments and everything will be in the full report when you all got it in November.
Yeah.
Commissioner Kessler.
I'll just echo the thanks for Rebecca's leadership. Obviously, her enthusiasm is contagious and it's fun to work on this with someone who has that much passion. So thank you for that. And this great Minsect show. I didn't even know about this. I looked this up. This is so cool. Live insects games, insect food. This is this Saturday, everyone. You can go and
That's awesome.
and participate. Sounds very cool. But I will also say that the partnership with the Bell Museum and things that come from the fair touch so many people. There were the tattoos, everybody loves these tattoos from the Eco Experience building. Previously, we had loons. Last year, we had butterflies, and the lieutenant governor always comes and makes a big deal of like getting the tattoo. So I'll just say that anytime you can bring your ideas to the fair and make them that attractive to so many people, you're winning. And then the Lawns to Legumes, since you represent the metro area, is wildly popular and never enough money, as Rebecca had said, but it raises awareness and just accessibility to so many people. And if you live in the metro core, it's much more common now to just, I mean, I live in Minneapolis. We turned our whole yard over to clover, which, my neighbors are doing this now too. And it's because they are seeing insects and flowers come back. So I would say that one for the metro area is particularly popular.
Thank you, Commissioner Kessler. As we've been talking here, I've seen some names flash across the screen, and just a reminder that comments in the chat box are not part of the record. So if anyone that's chatted would like to make your comments public, the floor for that.
This is Commissioner Arnold. I was just saying that my kids had pollinator seed packets come home with them. So I was just lifting up the good work and having gotten it in my personal life too.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Arnold. Commissioner Grunwald.
Yes, want to echo what everyone has said so far, what the other commissioners have said so far. Congratulations, Rebecca, really, and to all of us on 10 years. But thank you, Rebecca, for your leadership. And I love that we have pollinator gardens right here on the Capitol complex, and that admin staff, our facility staff, maintains them. And also, I always see people stopping to look at them too, because they're really in bloom. So for so much of the year, and they really catch people's attention. So thank you for your work.
Thank you, Commissioner Grunwald. Anyone else online? Comments, questions, feedback? Okay, hearing none, we're ready to go to the next part of the meeting, which is about a 20-minute recess. We'll recess until 2 p.m. Okay, so it's just about 2 o'clock, everyone. Welcome back. I am now going to turn over the chair duties to Chair Daubenberger.
Thank you, Co-Chair Katzenberg. Appreciate you kicking off the meeting and sharing it up to this point. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Daubenberger. I'm the Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Transportation and Chair for the EQB. And I understand we are on item 5 on the agenda, which is the gas resource, the gas production rulemaking, and the gas resource development projects mandatory category rulemaking approval is what we are planning to do today. So our presenter is Jesse Krasensky, Environmental Review Program Director. And Jesse, are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As Chair noted, I am Jesse Krasensky, and good afternoon, everybody. I am the Director of the Environment Review Program here at the EQB. And today I plan to discuss the rulemaking draft proposal for mandatory categories for gas resource development projects, with today's focus being on the request for the board to approve staff with moving forward with the rulemaking process in order to publish a notice of intent to adopt rules. So with that, I wanted to just run through what we plan to chat about today. And so I plan to give some reminders, really basically in terms of, what is driving this rulemaking in regards to legislation and the previous board resolution, but also to discuss what this rulemaking and sort of the development of these rules is ultimately meant to achieve. And that will tie into really the understanding of what the draft rules as provided in the materials today are meant to identify in terms of the types of gas projects that should require mandatory environmental review. And then we will spend some time to cover and go over the anticipated rulemaking steps. And lastly, I will provide you with staff's recommendation in regards to the resolution for allowing staff to move forward with the rulemaking process, and then of course be available for any discussion and questions following that. Before I get into that, I wanted to just quick hit some of the materials. I know there was a lot. I think that's part of the slide, is to just have that in front of us here to start us off. There were some updates that went out yesterday, so I wanted to hit those. The resolution that was on the original packet of pages 14 and 15 needed to be updated. There was a typo that we had to catch, and also had to incorporate the other piece that was updated, which is the draft rule language. So in the original packet, pages 20 to 21, the draft rule language was provided, but that was staff written draft rule language. Had to provide that because at the time we did not have the official reviser's version of the draft rules. We now have that. They match perfectly. None of the language changed in there. It's just we now have the official version of the draft reviser's packet of the draft rule language. And I also wanted to highlight the pieces of these that we intend to continue to move forward with the rulemaking process. So on this list, 3, 4, and 5, the notice of intent to adopt rules is sort of the administrative piece that must go forward with the publication. Obviously, the draft rule language would be incorporated within that. And then lastly, the justification document, which serves as a very lengthy, informative piece that really supports and identifies the reasoning for the draft rule language as proposed. So now to go back to, the reminders of what is driving this rulemaking, which really is this legislative directive from 2024, which sort of had two arms to it. If you remember, there was quite a few updates in 2024, 2025 about the GTAC process. So the Technical Advisory Committee that provided recommendations to legislation that would potentially lead to the development of a temporary regulatory framework. So that was the sort of the first arm of that legislation, and that was completed in January of 2025. EQB participated in that, and DNR led that process. Ultimately, those recommendations that were provided to legislation did not result in the creation of a temporary framework. And so then we transitioned to the rulemaking side of that legislation that identified rulemaking authorities for a number of different agencies, EQB included. And then in April of 2025, there was a resolution passed by the board approving staff to move forward with the rulemaking process for developing mandatory categories for gas production projects. And so within the bounds of the legislation and the board resolution, the scope of this rulemaking that we're working on is really limited to the creation of mandatory categories for gas production. Now, when you think about the rules for environmental review, you can identify many different buckets of what those rules are meant to do. There's rules for the process of environmental review and how to do environmental review. There's rules about the types of analysis and things that environmental review should result in. But the piece that we are working on with this rulemaking is the rules that identify when projects must undergo environmental review, known as the mandatory categories. So the rules as proposed are only focused within that bucket. We do not have the authority within, staff did not feel we had the authority within this rulemaking to identify any other pieces of rules that could be adjusted within the program. And so with that, I wanted to provide a reminder here of what the rules need to accomplish, and that is in establishing categories of actions for which environmental impact statements or EISs and for which environmental assessment worksheets or EAWs must be prepared. And so statute and rule identify that when there is potential for significant environmental effects, an EIS must first be prepared for a project. And when there may be potential for significant environmental effects, the rules identify that a project must first prepare an EAW. A reminder that an EAW is to serve as the determination process for whether or not that project that does have the potential for significant environmental effects and therefore requiring an EIS. So in order to accomplish these requirements, then the development of these rules must identify project types with a governmental action at which the nature or location of those projects identify the project may or does have the potential for significant environmental effects. And also, of course, the RGU is identified. So I wanted to walk through a little bit of the process from staff's perspective of how we went through this rule development. And so EQB staff, in considering what the rules really needed to accomplish, really chose to focus our process and in our efforts of updating the board and tribal coordination and stakeholder engagement, really around this idea of discussing the concepts of the rules and really, in other words, try to identify the key question of what kind of projects should undergo mandatory environmental review. And we really wanted to get input on these concepts before putting rule language together, as we felt that was the most informative piece of this rulemaking. And when you look at the rules as they're written for the mandatory categories, they do follow a very sort of typical framework and how they identify types of projects that must undergo environmental review based on certain thresholds. And so in this process, we have certainly heard and learned that we were likely not as clear about our approach as we maybe should have been. And this did lead to some input that identified lack of time that was available to review sort of the official draft language. And you will see that, I think, in your packet. One of the comments that we received addresses that specific concept. So that is something that we think we will learn from and adjust as we move forward, especially not just for other projects, but as we continue this rulemaking. So to get back to sort of our process of understanding the components of mandatory categories and what the rules need to achieve, staff have identified, the types of projects for which a governmental action is required, by proposing a new definition within the rules of a gas resource development project. And this will identify the type of gas production as those that will be required to obtain a permit from the DNR, for which the rules of that regulatory authorities are to be adopted. So they are undergoing their own rulemaking as we speak, similar to what we are working on here, and granted under the statute authority of statute 93. So that is verbatim as we will be proposing within the draft rules. I thought it'd be nice here to really clarify the types of projects of how we're identifying the known governmental action and how that ties into the mandatory category. So then within the bounds of that gas resource development project definition, the rules as proposed that incorporate the concepts for which staff have discussed in previous meetings, which include requiring environmental review based on the size of a project, the location of a project, or techniques to be incorporated within a project. And so the thresholds as proposed within the draft rule language then identify that sort of, the smallest or the basic type of projects would not require a mandatory environmental review, but based on the potential for significant environmental effects. But then as these projects grow in size or are located in certain areas or incorporate these certain techniques then the potential for significant environmental effects does indicate the need for mandatory environmental review. And then RGUs remain responsible for identifying when projects may require discretionary review based on nature and location of those projects that may not rise to the level of mandatory review, or within those projects that has been requiring an EAW. The EAW process itself still serves as the process to identify whether those projects do have the potential for significant environmental effects and require an EIS. So with that, staff research in identifying potential for significant environmental effects and the process of coordinating with tribes and cooperating with state agencies while drafting these rules have indicated these 4 thresholds to align with the need for a mandatory EAW, thus indicating that these types of projects may have the potential for significant environmental effects. And so in general, the environmental concerns from land use conversion and noise and lighting and traffic, air emissions, and to groundwater served as the reasoning for the development of all the proposed thresholds that you see here. Now, the justification document itself really goes into further depth and discusses the specifics of the environmental effects from these thresholds while considering previous program decisions about potential for significant environmental effects within existing mandatory categories for which comparisons can be made based on these threshold decisions that we've proposed here. And so the thresholds that, staff have identified within the draft rule language as requiring a mandatory EAW are for gas resource development projects of 5 or more production wells. The other threshold here would be for any size. This is regardless of size, where a gas resource development project is located in areas where the DNR is proposing to prohibit or restrict certain activities within their regulatory framework that they are developing. The next threshold, again, regardless of size, would be requiring an EAW for any gas resource development project that incorporates underground injection for waste disposal, a gas project. And then the last threshold here is a mandatory EAW for any gas resource development project intending to produce gas, which has been created in the subsurface by means of underground injection. Now, the next slide is just sort of a repeat of what I said, but for EIS thresholds. And so for staff research and identifying potential for significant environmental effects and that process of coordinating with tribes and other state agencies while drafting those rules did indicate that projects incorporating high volume hydraulic fracturing techniques do have the potential for significant environmental effects and therefore should require a mandatory EIS. Now, this rule is a little busy, so I apologize, but it's rather informative and helps sort of ground us at where we are today and sort of the process and what to expect moving forward. And so today, we are at this space where staff has gone through the research and developed the rules and done the coordination and the outreach and engagement, and we are now coming to board for the approval of the draft rule language, which would allow staff to move forward with the rulemaking process, which that first true official step of the rulemaking process is to publish the notice of intent to adopt rules. So that goal of publishing the notice of intent to adopt rules is based on, or the time of that is based on the legislation requiring expedited rulemaking for this process. And that has to be done by May 22nd of this year. And so if approved today, we would move forward, staff would move forward to publishing that notice, which would then commence a public comment period. Staff are anticipating at this time, this would be published on May 18th. Public comment period would likely be 45 days, which would then end on July 2nd. As the comment period ends, there would be an opportunity to respond to those comments and make potential modifications to the rule language as needed, so long as the changes are within the scope of the notice and the issues raised and are sort of a logical outgrowth of the notice and the comments that are received. And ultimately, after that comment period and any adjustments that staff feel are necessary that were returned to board will have an opportunity to review any of those adjustments and approve staff to continue to move forward, which will then be sort of the official adoption of the rules. I think we were anticipating that formal adoption stage after the board has had an opportunity to review any changes being late this year, October, November, potentially, depending on how sort of things shake out through the process. And so with that, staff are recommending that the board approve the draft rules as provided in the packet materials and vote today to approve the resolution in order for staff to move forward with the rulemaking process and allow the draft rules to be proposed by publishing a notice of intent to adopt rules and commencing the public comment period again, with the goal of that being May 18th. And so in approving the resolution, allowing the draft rules to be proposed and noticed for public comment, the board is identifying that the staff have demonstrated the proposed rule has established a rational basis related to the objective of creating mandatory categories for gas resource development project. We've demonstrated a reasonable case for the rules as proposed and have demonstrated that the rules are ready for public comment. With that, I will hand it back to Chair Daubenberger to share a discussion, and I'm happy to answer any questions that we may have here related to any of the materials that were in the packet or anything that I discussed here today.
Great. Well, thank you, Jesse, for going through this, and thanks for all your work and your team's work on this to get us to this point. So board members, the decision in front of us is about whether to move these proposed rules on mandatory categories for gas resource development projects forward for public notice and for formal public comment. So it's going into the public at this point to let them know we are taking on rulemaking and having these proposed rules and getting their comments. So that's the point we're at. And do board members have any questions for Jesse or other staff at this time? And note, we will have time for public input before we take a vote. But board members, please go ahead and raise your hand or just jump in and looking to see if any hands are raised. I'm not seeing any, but Dr. Nuschler, oh, I see one. Go ahead, board member Bauerkemper.
All right, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jesse, for providing today's update and this overview. I have what I'll try to make a quick constellation of comments. Much gratitude again to you, Jesse, and your team there for moving through the process that you just described, and much gratitude to the many people, the many entities that participated in that have contributed a great deal to the process thus far. I'm looking forward to continuing, the process as it perhaps moves along after today. Certainly looking forward to the public comment that we'll hopefully receive shortly. For the moment, I'm still learning every moment here, but at this time I'm supportive of moving this draft forward and want to say that because of the good things that are included in it, even while I have some angst about many things that are not included in it. And I'll point out, probably at no surprise, the charts that are on packet pages 42 through 50, which give me a bit of pause on the one hand because of the overwhelming majority of that input reflected there is not reflected in the draft. But I'm glad to have that chart. I'm glad it's been made, it's a couple of charts, I suppose, but I'm glad they've been made available to us. So thank you for pulling those together so that we can see the significant extent of tribal input through this process, and we can see the very limited extent to which that input is reflected in the current draft. And we can also see a bit about the reasoning for that. More importantly, I'm glad that we have that, from my kind of fading perspective as a outgoing board member here. I'm under the impression that this is my last time here on behalf of the 8th District as a public member. So I'll kind of mark that trivial occasion by asking the rest of the board and asking the staff to keep that input that's reflected in those charts there. Keep that close. Keep it in mind as the rule language continues to evolve, continues to develop across the coming months, perhaps depending on what decision is taken here today. And in any case, as the EQB more broadly continues to live into our mission as a board and into the spirit of what I think of, and I hope that we have a consensus on this, the spirit of our established tribal engagement, obligations and commitments that we've made in various ways. So I'll say that. I also do have a kind of want to amplify a specific suggestion for how the draft, might be improved subsequently in this process over the coming months, but I'll just, send that to you, perhaps Jesse, for potential later consideration, thinking about how the work we're doing here could perhaps align in important and useful ways with existing rules regarding feedlots and drinking water. So I'll send that to you for you to, file and process accordingly with the various other things that you'll be taking in today and beyond. So again, much gratitude to everyone involved in this. Continue to stay involved and continue to bear in mind the various obligations and opportunities at hand. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Bauer-Kemper, for your thoughts and sharing your perspectives and your gratitude. And thank you for all your engagement in this topic too, and all your service to the board. I know there are other hands up, but I understand Board Member Holman in the room also had his hand up, and I missed it early, so go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a clarification question. I too, I'm prepared to support the action to advance the process. This had to do with the thresholds and the 5 well or greater threshold. There were some comments submitted about should it be 3, and I don't want to get into the technical debate of that. I'm not qualified. But my question about that threshold of wells had to do with clarity around, is that per landowner, per entity, per company, per entity, or is there a geography assigned to that, like a minor watershed? I was just confused where the 5 might. I'm kind of familiar with the feedlot side of how that's determined in a county level. Just curious on this gas production well side of the question.
Chair and Member Holman. So the staff's development of the definition of gas resource development production project, gas resource development project, it is intended to identify the action or the project as a whole as the project that would be applying for a permit through the DNR. So the threshold then would be applied to whatever that entity is applying for within that space. And so the idea is our understanding of these types of projects is likely to be sort of a centralized processing facility with, you can think of it sort of as a spoken wheel sort of thing where there's connected production wells to that centralized processing facility. So the threshold then would more or less apply to as a project is applying, how many wells do you have? And then at the time, if it's less than 5 or if it expands within a certain number of years, that threshold would have to be applied within the existing rules of the look back rules that we have. And so it really is intended. It doesn't necessarily incorporate a specific area. It is fully tied to how is that project is applying for their permit through the DNR? How is that being identified as a project from that perspective?
So Madam Chair, as a follow-on, should I
Yes.
ask another question?
Go ahead.
So if one permit application is on a space and stays under the threshold trigger for a mandatory EAW, and another applicant is right next or adjacent, but it's a different applicant for a different permit, the two wouldn't be additive or looked at cumulatively. They'd be looked at as separate permit applications. And the reason I ask that, of course, is the resources are finite. There's a resource boundary. And so it's not unusual to think that there would be multiple entities looking for permits, whereas the trigger could be the person could stay below the trigger for environmental review, but still be having a representative geographic input of significance. Does the rule capture that?
Chair and Member Holman, so the rules of environmental review are meant to capture those scenarios typically in how we would define connected and phased action. So those are there in the rules now. Different project proposers typically are less likely to trigger those based on how they're defined. Those are usually not always viewed as different projects. Now it depends on, is one necessitating the other, or is one, leading into this other one that has to happen because of this other one. Now, there is certainly a potential if those two projects, now I'm not the RGU, so this would be up to their permitting decisions, but if there are a centralized processing facilities, for instance, and two different project proposers are utilizing the same space, I think that there's more likely a connected action there it may still trigger the same threshold. It really depends on how they design their project. Are they processing and producing gas in the same space with the same facilities, or do they have their own?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, why don't we go next to Board Member Martin?
Great, thanks, Chair Dobbenberger. And Jesse, thanks for all your work. I also feel good about this, but I wanted to, so I have a couple of kind of technical questions, but I wanted to first switch the order and talk about, just to reinforce something that Member Bauer-Kemper was saying. I want to follow on that before getting to my technical questions. So, as one of the board members who is very involved in working with Kayla on the tribal consultation policy, I was uncomfortable reading just over and over, the tribal input being rolled out of scope. And at the same time, I agreed with it being out of scope in a way, because I think it would be a strange thing just in the context of this particular project type, which is a very specific thing, helium and hydrogen development, to address an issue that really touches on potentially all of environmental review, where the tribes were saying, we need to know about impacts of these projects on tribal reservations or tribal treaty ceded lands, which is, huge amount of the state, actually. So I understand why we were saying this is out of scope for a narrower rule focused on gas resource development projects. And also the fact that taking on these sort of issues would really affect the whole environmental review process. But I just wanted to sort of flag that as something if we're trying to do, tribal consultation, or I guess in this case, coordination, well, at some point, I think we have to figure out a way to address those broader concerns. And I don't know what that process is. I'm not suggesting anything specific today, but I do think that's, so on the one hand, I agree with saying it was out of scope for this narrow rule. On the other hand, I feel like that's something we have to sort of loop back to in some way, and I don't know how. So that's probably just a comment. To the technical, I had two different sort of technical thoughts in reading the rule. One was just something that I thought that I didn't understand right away, and I think I figured out over the course of reading it. But I wanted to mention this because I think it maybe might not be clear to the public when this goes out, and could be made clear, is that when I first just read the rule language, which is really brief, it's just 2 pages. On the face of it, all it seems to be saying over and over is that DNR is the RGU. And I figured out that when you read that in the context of the existing 4410, 4300, it's just by adding that into the mandatory EAW categories, that's what's happening. But there wasn't an explanation up front that by listing this here, we're not just telling you who the RGU is. These are the things we're adding into the mandatory EAW categories. And the fact that we're putting 5 in this one and not putting any number in this other types means that even one well in these other types triggers a mandatory EAW. So I don't know if that makes sense. It just like I figured it out eventually, but you know, it probably could have been clearer up front. Also just a comment. And then the one thing that I did want to mention, and I think it's similar to what Chair Holman was saying about connected and phased actions, but I think it's a little bit different concern. As I was reading this, I thought about how like if I were like a bad actor that was trying to get around having to do an EAW, what I would do is a whole series of 4 well projects under different company names, like setting up a different company for each one. So that, or I would do like 4 and then in a second phase, I would do 4 again, or maybe I wouldn't even know at the beginning how good the deposit was. So I couldn't, even if I wasn't a bad actor, I was just, you know, couldn't tell the permitting agency at the beginning whether I was going to ultimately have 4 wells or 20 wells, right? So like ultimately, like I think you did think about this, and that, you know, this is dealt with by the existing rules around connected actions and phased actions, but that didn't come, that was like buried in actually I think in some of the tribal consultation stuff. So that, you know, probably you know this stuff so well that was obvious to you, but like that also could be addressed up front, that like how does this avoid the problem of somebody trying to keep projects smaller or phase them in such a way that they stay under the thresholds. I think you have a way of doing that, but I think that could be clearer up front as well.
You, Board Member Martin. And Jesse, do you have any thoughts on that, or just noting the comments?
Chair and Member Martin, I think those are all great comments and things that we can consider and make sure that we are clear as we move forward. I don't know that you needed a full response from me today based on that, but if you had a more specific question that you wanted me to respond to, I'd be happy to do that.
No, I mean, I think they're just things to flag as like, especially those last ones that like, it might head off concerns, addressing that up front, but you know, in case somebody's initial fear was like what mine was, like there's ways to get around this kind of thing, you know. So nothing more than that, I think.
You, Board Member Martin. All right. Why don't we move on then to Board Member Smith? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davenberg. I appreciate that. And Jesse, thank you for the continued education and enlightenment. This is definitely an area outside of my subject matter expertise, so feels like drinking from a fire hose, but trying to stay afloat as we go. Just a couple comments and a couple questions for you. Again, maybe not for immediate response today, but for consideration as things move forward. So as we, you know, here at the EQB and as citizens of the great state of Minnesota, we really see our role as preserving and protecting resources while also looking forward for that responsible and sustainable economic development. I mean, that's a key part of what we're trying to accomplish as public members, as commissioners, as staff, et cetera. So I really want to make sure that we are trying to find and strike that balance as we move forward. A few of the questions, and I am glad that we are not at final rule language. I'm not comfortable with the final rule language, but I'm comfortable with continuing the process forward. So I guess regarding, and it's already been brought up by a few of my colleagues, regarding the 5 wells versus other thresholds, and this is most likely specifically referring to the tribal letter that was received in the most recent comments. You know, the tribe, I believe with Grand Portage, was requesting or recommending 3. When I was reading through the information and looking at that trigger for 5 wells, it did state, I believe it's on packet page 34, that justification was provided by one potential project and then extrapolated from there. So I think my first question is, did I miss it where the staff review was greater than just looking at one project with extrapolation data? Or is that an opportunity leading up to and then through the public comment period to hone in on that a little bit more and potentially look at 3 versus 5. Like, what would be the differentiation of 3 versus 5 in this case? So I'll pause there for question number 1 of, was this one potential project reviewed and extrapolated to get to 5 as the threshold?
ahead,
Thanks,
Jesse.
Chair and Member Smith. So certain aspects of the data analysis within that justification, yes, are based on a, I don't even know that you can call it a project at this point. It's exploratory. There is data available. But that is not the only level of detail that was utilized in sort of the data analysis. Now, there are certainly limited availability of other projects that we can compare to, but specifically we did have information and specific data from Helium Project, specifically in Colorado, that is a similar concept and idea, now different gas compositions surely, but there are other aspects within the justification document that point to other projects and understanding, you know, the compositions of gas, the types of gas, and the shipments of gas, and some of those things. Now, you are right, some of that data is specifically based off of one project, you know, the proposed project here in Minnesota, but not all of that data that is provided there. The other data from other projects, specifically in Colorado, were really meant to support in sort of the analysis of the understanding of potential here in Minnesota versus other projects. So there are other projects that we looked at, albeit there are a very limited amount of similar projects to pull data from, but there were other projects that we did look at.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, would just be something to review of, should we hone that back a little bit based on comment received? Does 5 make sense? So I would just be interested in continuing that conversation. I do have 2 more topics, generally speaking, that I'd like to just address quickly, or as quickly as possible. Regarding the siting prohibitions, you know, when we were reading through and receiving comments from the Nature Conservancy and some other commentors, really a lot was posed around not authorizing drilling in sensitive natural landscapes or in sensitive cultural areas. So I think for those of us in this area, in the environmental review area, those prohibitions can be fairly clear. I believe they're DNR required, recommended, et cetera. But for a general public or somebody maybe not as familiar, will those guidelines be updated? And I know EQB is working on updated guidelines. Will those quote unquote siting prohibitions be clearly identified so that somebody can go immediately to a resource and understand what the prohibitions entail?
Chair and Member Smith. So yes, the plan, the unfortunate reality of writing draft rules while another agency is writing draft rules is that we could not directly reference those draft rules. So they reference them in sort of that broad and vague understanding of where the authority is. So as the DNR's rulemaking is available and goes through the same public process, comment process that ours are, those will be more available to view. And hopefully, depending on how the process plays out of who finishes first, or once those are you know, adopted rules, you know, potentially our ability to directly reference those may be more clear as this plays out.
Excellent. And Chair, one more comment, if you don't mind. Thank you. So then final thoughts, and this does really get back to that tribal consultation and coordination need. Member Martin, Chair Holman, all have already kind of alluded to this, but that concept of, I believe it was on packet page 8, where it was a response basically stating that we identified the need to consider impacts on treaty reserve and ceded territory through the environmental review process. My question, as we continue down this road, whether it's with this or other opportunities, and again, no need to respond to this one specifically today, but for this board and then for future staff consideration, is how will we get after that? How is it proposed to move this need forward? And how will that eventually or ultimately be captured in the updated rule language? So I will just end with that thought for the group today and appreciate again, Jesse, everything that you've been educating us on. And yeah, continue the education process as we go. Much appreciated to staff and team.
Thank you, Board Member Smith and Jesse. If you want to respond to any of that right now, go ahead. But otherwise, we can just move on to the next person who has their hand up.
Chair Daubenberger, I could just say briefly, I think we're hearing that and I think it's something to think about in a bigger picture and potentially as we consider our fiscal 27 work plan. So that it's on my mind as we move towards considering that in the next couple of months, all these things that you're saying about how do we respond to these big pictures.
Thank you, Director Nuschler. All right, the next hand up I see is Board Member Nelson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Daubenberger. I had a few things, and I'll try to go through them rapidly here, but I had the same concern that Board Member Martin had about 4+4 and kind of digging in that phased action or connected actions part. I know that we ran into that quite a bit with gravel mining, with kind of sneaking past that numbers there. And ultimately it came down to the RGU going for discretionary when we thought it was suspect. And so one of my questions would be not necessarily to staff, but to DNR as to how comfortable are you pulling discretionary UUWs? And I have a few more for you, so we'll save that up. But otherwise, one comment I had is I spent a lot of time going through how you came up with the 5 well versus 3 well versus 1. And I appreciate the analysis, and I recognize the lack of significant information that you have. But I came away feeling that the 5 well analysis was still rather conservative with respect to identifying impacts when compared equivalently to what we have as triggers for other mandatory categories. Traffic would be less than what we'd have for silica mines. Land conversion would be less than what we had for comparable land conversion things. So I felt comfortable after I really dove into that. The one thing that kind of borders that line is the comment from the tribes about the malfunctioning wells. But to me, and this would be a question again to both you and the DNR then, is that's more of a permit issue to me. And I wonder if within DNR's permit framework, that the rules that they're doing, is there a term for permits? Do they have to renew them, do some reporting, do some inspection on the functioning of the wells in order to get renewed? And also with respect to that, what's the timeline for DNR rules? Are they parallel to this, going to be landing about the same time? And that's it. So I don't know if you can remember all that's buried in there or not, but thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. And the next hand up I see is DNR Commissioner Stroman, but maybe before we go to her, if Jesse or any EQB staff wanted to address any comments that Board Member Nelson made, I'll just pause here. Otherwise, we can go ahead and go on to Commissioner Stroman.
Sure, Chair, Member Nelson. I think the one question I can answer immediately is in terms of the timing of the DNR proposed rules. They are under the same timeline we are on, so I believe they are anticipating of publishing at the same time we are, May 18th, and so those will be available at the same time for public comment. I do believe we have some DNR staff available to answer certain questions if you do want those questions now in regards to permit limits, time limits, or those other pieces. Otherwise, I can leave it to Stroman to discuss or to leave for her questions, since her hand is up next.
Yeah, Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Why don't we go to Commissioner Stroman, and Commissioner, I will let you decide if you want to call staff up to help with any questions at this point, or if you want to take it and then call them up or respond later.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Daubenberger. Jesse, thank you for all of your work on this, and thanks to the board for very careful consideration of some really complex issues here, and of course, doubly complex because you have two entities, both DNR and EQB, with different elements of this process. So one, I will just note that my hand was up for some comments before Board Member Nelson's questions. I think what I will just say to those, you know, they are totally fair questions. To the question on, you know, discretionary, that is a very case specific kind of calculation. And so that is not something to which I can give you a general answer here today. And with respect to the DNR rules around gas production, the permitting structure, Jesse gave you the time frame, so I think folks will get an opportunity very soon to see those. What I will say is those are not yet publicly available, and so I don't think we are, either me or staff are in a position to respond to specifics about what will be in those rules when they are public, because we're just not at that point yet. So I'm just going to beg a little bit of patience, and I think, as Jesse already noted, we are trying to be as parallel as possible, but you know, somebody had to go first here. So that is the reality there, and I think the opportunity will be, you know, folks can certainly ask questions or make comments during the DNR process, and then, you know, when the board comes back here, there will be an opportunity to see the full picture. So that is what I would say about that. I think just more broadly to the EQB rule, you know, I'm certainly prepared to support moving to the public comment period. I think, you know, similar to many of the other board members here, we might not be in a space of perfect, but you know, we're at a point where I think the public comment is of value in this process, and just recognizing that, you know, this rule and the mandatory category decisions are really established in consideration of both that technical basis as well as public concern. And I think it's there's no doubt that that public process can and likely will raise some new information and some opportunities for clarification. And so, you know, we expect that likely to be part of the process, as it typically is in rulemaking. I think one thing I would offer, just as a principle that is important to us at DNR, and maybe a clarification around one of the categories here. You know, I think we think it's important in environmental review that mandatory categories be developed in ways where they are clearly implementable, and not that we get into situations where categories are on the books that are either not usable or they're never triggered, right? Because it can create confusion and I think false expectations from multiple perspectives about what is allowed and what is not. And to that end, for the category related to the creation of gas and having that have a mandatory component to it with DNR as the RGU, I do just want to note that DNR's authorities do not extend to the creation of gas. Our authorities are around extraction of gas. And so this is a category that we do not believe, unless those authorities are changed, would be used. And certainly can understand that EQB may decide, even if it's not going to be used today, if DNR's authorities change, like then it's already in the rule. I just want to be clear that that is not something that is in the authorities of DNR, and so therefore not able at this time to happen, and therefore don't really see that category being used. And I just want to make sure that the board members are aware that is not currently under DNR authorities, and so is therefore not something that is allowed in Minnesota. So that is what I wanted to share here today, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner Stroman. All right, well, I am not seeing any more hands up from board members. Executive Director Nuschler, am I missing anything, or anyone in the room wanted to say anything more before we go to public input?
I think we're good here in the room, Madam Chair.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, board members, for those questions and comments and the discussion. So if there are no more questions at this point, we do want to offer the opportunity for the public to provide input on this decision before the board. And I ask members of the public to focus on the decision that's in front of us today, and that is whether to move this rule forward for public period, formal public comment period. Detailed technical comments are really best suited for that formal public comment period. So I don't know that anyone is attending there in person today, but if you're online, please use the raise hand function if you'd like to comment, or note it in the chat that you'd like to comment, and Steph will call on you, and then you will be able to unmute and speak online after she calls on you. But please be relatively brief with your comments and remarks, and I'll let you know if we need to wrap up due to time. So one last check, Director Nuschler, are there any public commenters in the room?
Madam Chair, there are not any commenters in the room.
Thank you. All right, so Steph, would you please call on the first online commenter?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have one commenter. It's Krishna Wirhaide.
Thank you. Thank you for the time. Yeah, my name is Krishna Wirhaide, and I'm the Environmental Director for the Grand Portage Band, Lake Superior, Chippewa. And I really appreciate the effort that EQB staff have invested in this rulemaking, as well as the board. And I support moving forward with the proposed rules, with the understanding that we'll continue to work with EQB staff to affect at least some of the changes we've requested, particularly in the protection of water resources when it comes to drilling. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna, for that comment. Are there any other online commenters?
Madam Chair, we don't have any more commenters at this time.
All right, thank you. Okay, so with that, we have the resolution. There were slight corrections to the resolution, so we are looking at the resolution that was sent out with the materials yesterday, as well as the formal reviser's draft of the rule that was included. So with the resolution, the board resolves to formally initiate the expedited rulemaking and have the executive director sign the EQB's notice of intent to adopt expedited rules for reviser file number R-04945, which was also sent out yesterday. And the executive director is authorized and directed to take all necessary further steps to implement the notice of intent. So that, is there a motion to approve of the resolution?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Kessler. I can make that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Kessler. The motion. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, second, Holman.
Thank you, Board Member Holman. Right. Is there any discussion on the motion? I'm not hearing any discussion. So, oh, I'm sorry. I see a hand up. Go ahead, Board Member Martin.
Just a point of clarification. So I don't know enough to know like whether 5 wells or 3 wells is the right threshold. So I don't have an opinion on that, but I just wanted to make sure that like if we move this forward today and any commenter feels that the threshold should be different, that input can still come through public comment and be considered in the later steps of the rule, right? Is that correct?
That is correct. Director Nuschler, do you want to say anything more on that?
Yeah, it might help if I just share a little bit about the rest of the process. So what happens is the notice and the rule language gets published in the state register, and it also gets posted on the on an e-comment site run by the Court of Administrative Hearings. And so that website, people get to go to and put in all of their comments and details at that time. And then that gets sent to us for us to review. And so, yeah, I think certainly one of the places we would love to have more input is if there is technical input on, you know, the impacts of a well, a couple of wells, how those things might be, any kind of information that might help us better support, better understand what the right number of wells is. And I think that would be very much within the scope of the notice and would not cause a concern that the rule has changed too much as a result of public comment. So that would be, I think, a place we would particularly like some comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Martin, and thank you, Director Nuschler. All right, any other discussion on the motion?
Madam Chair, we're occasionally losing sound here, so I think maybe you cut out for a second. But I think you called on Board Member Smith. Yep.
I'm going to
Yes, I
drive
think-
forward. All right.
Go for it.
All right, excellent. Just a quick question regarding the concurrent processes that are happening right now. I do understand that DNR is also working through their own process. Is there a tentative timeline for when that comment period is going to happen, or do we have any of that information at this point?
Sure, Board Member Smith, Madam Chair, my understanding is that everything's gonna come out on the same day and we're gonna be running on the same time frame. So people should be able to look at the two things side by side, and Commissioner Stroman is giving the thumbs up. So you should all be there.
Excellent. I think that's just going to help public commenters and other personnel look through this concurrently. So much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Smith. I just heard the very end of that, and it sounds like you all lost my audio. Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, not seeing or hearing any. So at this point, why don't we go to the roll call vote? So Executive Director Nuschler, would you call the roll for the vote?
Yes, Madam Chair. So on the resolution, Commissioner Arnold,
Yes, I'm sorry, I couldn't find my mute button, but here I am. Yes.
okay, thank you, Commissioner Arnold. Board Member Bakken,
Support.
Board Member Bauer-Kemper,
Yes.
Board Member Brands, not with us. Commissioner Cunningham, not with us. Chair Daubenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Gronval,
Yes.
Board Member Hintz, he is not with us. Chair Holman,
Aye.
Board Member Katzenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler,
Yes.
Board Member Martin, Board Member Martin,
Muted.
your mute button.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Verilek is not with us. Board Member Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson is not with us. Board Member Smith
Aye.
and Commissioner Stroman.
Aye.
Right. That is 12 votes in favor, Madam Chair.
Great. So the board resolution passes. Well, thank you, board members, for your participation and thoughtful discussion today, particularly on this very complex issue of establishing mandatory categories and the rulemaking process for that. This does bring us to the end of the agenda, but I know that this is likely the last meeting for several of our board members. Board members Bauer-Kemper and Nelson. Also, I think board members Brand and Hintz. So thank you all for your service to the Environmental Quality Board. It is very much appreciated. We've really enjoyed and appreciated having you on the board and your input over the years. And just thank you for your service. So let's give them a hand. All right. So as I mentioned, we did reach the end of the agenda, but one call out here, is there any further business? Not hearing or, oh, go ahead.
Board Member Bakken, Chair. I don't know if this is the appropriate place to ask, but I was wondering what kind of time you had, Catherine, with regard to the House File 466 requiring EQB to come up with EAWs for drainage projects. Is that something we can discuss later, or I don't know if you're familiar with it yet or not, but that was something that was brought up to me yesterday.
Sure. Madam Chair, Board Member Bakken, that bill, I believe, is being brought forward to a House hearing tomorrow afternoon. I will say, well, I have some concern with the way it's written at the moment because it directs us to use exempt rulemaking, which I think would be very difficult for the direction they have given to us to make those categories, because at this point, there's not specificity about who should do the review. So you know, the legislature can make policy decisions, but that's my technical concern with the bill at the moment. I know it's a very complex issue. I know it's one that's been in front of us or has come up at the board and in our engagement. So I am planning to attend the hearing tomorrow, and I'd be happy to talk to you more about it if you just want to give me a call.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Board Member Bakken. Any other business? I am not hearing anything. I think I just saw something pop in the chat. Note for me. Board Member Smith in the chat. Thank you for that. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.